George W. Bush took initiative in creating a pandemic response plan during his presidency. Barack Obama and his administration also developed a pandemic response plan, including specific instructions for a novel coronavirus outbreak. Yet, despite having access to a detailed instruction manual, Trump and his administration failed to respond to the coronavirus pandemic. How did this happen, and what were the policies put in place by Trump to fight the coronavirus pandemic? Here's a timeline which includes an overview of all key steps taken by the US government in fighting this outbreak.
On the 17th of November 2019, the first case of coronavirus was confirmed in Wuhan. The World Health Organization was only informed by Chinese officials about a month later and first reported a pneumonia of an unknown cause on the 5th day of 2020. Shortly after the first COVID infection on US soil was confirmed, and the next day, on the 22nd of January, President Donald J. Trump told CNBC, "We have it totally under control." 1 week later, the first step in tackling the virus was made public when Trump announced that a coronavirus task force is going to lead his administration's response to the outbreak. The next day, the first person-to-person transmission on the virus in the US was confirmed. On the last day of January, the first official policy was put in place by the Trump administration, stopping people who had been in China in the 2 previous weeks from entering the country on the grounds of declaring COVID a public health emergency. In an interview he gave Fox News on February 2nd, Trump commented,
"Pretty much shut it down, coming in from China,"
on his travel blockade.
Something only time would reveal was the first death by COVID in the US, which has now been tracked back to the 6th of February. Now, when looking at this pandemic and different responses to it over the course of what has been almost an entire year, it is remarkable how little certain politicians, including Trump, seem to care about it. At times, it seems as if Donald Trump was completely oblivious to the urgency of the situation. However, the book Rage by investigative journalist Bob Woodward, published on the 15th of September, tells a different story, which starts on February the 7th. In an interview Trump gave to Woodward after speaking with Chinese President Xi, he said,
"This is more deadly. This is 5% versus 1% and less than 1%. So this is deadly stuff."
Yet, 3 days later, when talking at a rally, Trump told a completely different story.
And by the way, the virus, they're working hard. Looks like by April, in theory, when it gets a little warmer, it miraculously goes away. I hope that's true.
Another detail which flew under the radar is that on the 21st, the CDC, Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, put a new counting system for confirmed cases in place, making the number appear smaller by creating a separate category for repatriated Americans.
On the 25th of February, Trump requested a $2.5 billion funding from Congress to use in his administration's coronavirus response. 2 days later, he put Vice President Mike Pence in charge of the US government's management of the coronavirus pandemic. At another rally, President Trump proceeded to use the pandemic as a means of political warfare, stating,
Now the Democrats are politicizing the coronavirus. And this is their new hoax.
1 day later, what was then perceived as the first death by COVID in the US was confirmed. It is no surprise that the financial crisis set off by the pandemic also hit the United States. To support the economy in the weeks before the outbreak, all interest rates were lowered by 0.5% on the 3rd of March.
March 11th, the World Health Organization labels the coronavirus a pandemic. That same day, an additional travel ban was implemented on European countries in the Schengen Agreement, Trump rationalizing, "We have seen dramatically fewer cases of the virus in the United States than are now present in Europe." 2 days later, Trump declares COVID a national health emergency, freeing up $50 billion in federal funding budget for his administration's response. On the 16th of March, Trump announced the official CDC guidelines on 15 days to prevent the spread, which simply recommend voluntary social distancing. Only 1 day later, the official US death count reached 100. At this crucial moment, Trump signed a coronavirus relief package into law, which includes free tests and paid emergency leave. However, as we now know 1 day later, he told Woodward,
"I wanted to always play it down. I still like playing it down.
Yes, sir.
Because I don't want to create a panic."
That same day, on his request of downplaying the virus, President Trump spread dangerous and misleading information, claiming that the FDA approved hydroxychloroquine as a treatment. The first and only statewide stay-at-home order was implemented by the Democratic governor of California.
26th of March 2020. This week, 3.3 million Americans filed for unemployment benefits as businesses shut down to slow the spread of the coronavirus. The next day, Congress passed a stimulus law, which was then signed by President Trump. It includes a $2 trillion emergency aid package, funding for small businesses, workers, industries, and hospitals during the rising economic crisis, and expanded unemployment benefits. At this point, more than 6.6 million people had filed for unemployment benefits, and on the last day of March, Trump declared at a COVID task force briefing, "It's not the flu, it's vicious." On April 3rd, when confronted with his previous claims at a COVID task force briefing, Trump asserted, "I didn't say a date, I said it's going away, and it's going away." 6th of April 2020. 10,000 official deaths have been reported in the US. 1 week later, President Trump accused the World Health Organization of severely mismanaging and covering up the spread of coronavirus and halted funding while a review was being conducted on his allegations. On the 16th, the Trump administration released different reopening guidelines for every state, which the president followed up with tweets supporting anti-lockdown protests and blue ones. To put the economic crisis into perspective, on the 21st of April, US oil prices had fallen to $37.63 a barrel from $65 the previous year. On April 28th, the US officially hit 1 million COVID cases.
Shortly after lockdown orders expired, President Trump handed over vague CDC guidelines to state governors, which they got to choose if they were going to implement. Trump then commented on the governors who opened businesses.
I am very much in favor of what they're doing. They're getting it going.
At a virtual town hall held on March 3rd, Trump asserted, "We did the right thing. I do look back on it, because my attitude was, we're not going to shut it down. This should have been stopped in China." A few days later, Trump downplayed the severity of an infection for children at a roundtable, saying,
It's very unique how the children aren't affected.
When looking at the response so far, it comes as no surprise that the Trump administration waited until mid-May to fund testing. More specifically, he announced that the federal government would be giving out $11 billion to states to expand testing capabilities. Back on his journey of questionable medical choices, Trump said he's taking hydroxychloroquine as a precautionary measure. By May 21st, all states started reopening, and 38.6 million people had filed for unemployment benefits. At a White House press conference, held the very next day, Trump elaborated on churches and other houses of worship reopening. Quote, "Governors need to do the right thing and allow these very important, essential places of faith to open right now, for this weekend." He proceeded to demand that churches reopen even in states still in lockdown, despite having no authority to do so, threatening to quote-unquote override governors who would stand him. At this point, it became crystal clear that he wants to cater to a very specific group of people to get re-elected: white evangelical Christians. Just to drive this last point home, he even went as far as to remark, "Some governors have deemed abortion clinics as essential." On the 23rd, the CDC published new considerations for churches. That same day, the US reached 100,000 official deaths. On the 4th of June, Trump claimed that 99% of coronavirus cases in America are totally harmless. Then, cases in the US reached 2 million.
The NIH put an end to Trump's adventures of spreading misinformed speculations by halting the clinical trial evaluating the safety and effectiveness of hydroxychloroquine as a treatment for the coronavirus, explaining, "A data and safety monitoring board met late Friday and determined that while there was no harm, the study drug was very unlikely to be beneficial to hospitalized patients with COVID-19. On July 7th, the Trump administration announced to Congress that the UN and the US is formally withdrawing from the World Health Organization on July 6, 2021. The next interview he gave to Woodward on August 14th, in which he said, "Nothing more could have been done. I acted early." Then finally, on the 15th of September, Rage was published, revealing that the president of the biggest country in the world knowingly downplayed the deadly virus sweeping the world. On October 2nd, Trump calmly proclaimed that he and his wife tested positive for the virus. Trump then spent 3 nights at the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center receiving treatment before returning to the White House.
In our opinion, the Trump administration failed to respond to early warning signs that a pandemic is coming and never developed an adequate testing system. But most importantly, the President of the United States told people not to listen to experts, consciously and continuously downplayed the virus, and essentially did nothing to try and stop the spread. The US was amongst the best prepared countries and ended up with tens of thousands of deaths that could have been prevented.